So once again, you're all welcome. What I'm going to do now is to explain with you what efficiency in terms of cost is about. Now, first of all, I want you to note some two things. One, there's a difference between efficiency and productivity. Who can tell me the difference between efficiency and productivity? And of course, when you explain, I'll let you explain further if the explanation is not that understandable to a 7-year-old child. So what is the difference, basically? What is the difference? Emily?
Okay, so for nice meeting you all. For efficiency, I would say it's taking the performance of an organization or a DMU, since we're dealing with DEA, a DMU at a particular time or a specific time, a specified time. Files for sorry. The next one is
Productivity.
Productivity. Thank you. For productivity, I would say it's taking the performance over a period of time. So I think that's the basic difference between efficiency and then productivity. One is at a specified time, and then one is over a period of time.
Good.
Thank you.
Any other addition? Now, even though I use the word productivity, you might all want to know that I meant productivity change. So normally in the literature, someone might use the word productivity. But note that because productivity deals with performance over time, instead of performance at a time, like efficiency does, because of that, productivity is always mentioned with regard to change. So we normally say productivity change. But if you don't want to say productivity change, you could also say dynamic productivity. Dynamic productivity. So that's exactly what Emily has indicated. One deals with at a time, one deals with over time. So which one is a subset of the other? Based on this, which is a subset of the other? Stephen?
So we will say that efficiency is a subset of productivity.
Okay. Yeah. Who can tell me why? Why efficiency is a subset of productivity? Francis?
Okay, Doc. So the reason being that to calculate productivity, you would have to know the efficiency at point 1 and the efficiency at time 2. Then you look at the change from time 1 to time 2. That gives you the productivity.
Perfect. Perfect. So calculating 4 different efficiency scores is the only way you can get a productivity score. And that is why productivity encompasses efficiency. All right. So let's start with cost efficiency. Our goal is to understand and calculate and extend the model of cost productivity change. But before we do that, we need to understand cost efficiency. What is cost efficiency? There's another name for cost efficiency, which is economic efficiency. Another name is overall efficiency. Liebenstein, okay, 1961. Another name is X efficiency. And because we are dealing with cost, it means that we are always focusing on inputs. If we are dealing with revenue, we are focusing on output. And we've learned throughout our discussion that the objective of the firm is input minimization or output maximization or both. We've learned that. So if the objective of the firm is to minimize inputs or maximize outputs, then we are dealing with technical efficiency. But the objective of the producer is to minimize costs. Then we are dealing with cost efficiency. So cost efficiency is measured as the minimum feasible cost to the observed cost. Now, the guy Farrell, when Farrell brought his idea of activity analysis, he brought about, cost efficiency. Okay. And that cost efficiency was not estimated using DEA. Later, Fair et al. 1985, introduced a cost efficiency that employs the DEA approach to estimate. So cost efficiency tells you the ability to produce the current output at a minimum cost, under the assumption that the prices are given. And when you have been able to estimate the cost efficiency, you can now split that cost efficiency into the technical, which you already know, and the allocative, which I want you to understand fully. The difference between allocative efficiency, technical efficiency, pure technical efficiency, and scale efficiency. I really want you to understand this importantly. So cost efficiency can be split into pure technical efficiency and scale efficiency. And these two make up the technical efficiency. And then we have the allocative efficiency. You need to know the difference between the scale efficiency and the allocative. You need to know that practically. You need to know that. Okay, and I'm going to be asking some of you to be telling me the difference. So please note the difference between the scale efficiency and the allocative. All right. So now we are just learning technicalities. So let's first remind ourselves of how you used to interpret the efficiency score. It's not a matter of saying that the firm is 70% efficient. That is not important to a manager. If you estimate an efficiency score and you say the firm is 70% efficient, which means the firm is 30% inefficient, and so what? How do you make sense of that? When you say that a firm is 57.9% efficient, what does that mean? What does that mean? Well, you need to take the reciprocal, subtract that value from 100%. And this is an input-oriented score. So what it means is that the firm should be able to cut the input, all the input level, proportionally, because we are dealing with radial measure, has to cut the input proportionally by 1 minus the 0.579. You have to cut the input, all the inputs, proportionally by 42.1%. Okay, keeping the output constant. You need to do that. Keeping the output constant. You need to cut the input by that percentage value in order to be as efficient as your peers, or in order to be on the frontier, or in order to get the target level that you are supposed to get. Interpretation is very important. So when you finally get your work and you get an efficiency score, interpret the score. Let the score make sense. Other than saying that the firm is this percent efficient and therefore this percent inefficient. Relate that with the input and the output and the peers and the targets. Relate that. It doesn't matter whatever you are studying, okay, what kind of efficiency you're looking at, you want to look at that. Okay, now, when you have an efficiency score of allocative efficiency score of 0.8, what would that mean? Well, it's here. What would that mean? Let me just go back and let me see how you will explain it for me. Who can tell me if you have an allocative efficiency score of 0.8, what does that mean? And you know, I'm enjoying calling people. I'm enjoying calling people by heart. Especially when I know that the person, Prince, are you there? Ibrahim. Yes. What would that mean, Ibrahim? Okay, so Ibrahim, I think your network, I'm not able to hear you. Miriam, are you there? Miriam. Miriam Bipembe.
Okay.
Miriam, do you have your radio on, or is people that you are associated with? I want to understand, because you know you are in an environment where we need. Are you deliberately turn on your radio, or you are just around people who are talking?
Okay, I'm around people who are talking outside, but I'm inside.
Okay, please try and always sort out this thing, because you know that I will always call you to answer something. Okay. Other than that, if you know you have a lecture like this, you want to go to the office. Okay, go and stay in the office, and then you follow through. Okay, please, please, okay, Miriam.
Okay, let me sort this out.
All right, Michael, how do you understand allocative efficiency of 0.8? Is it that people don't know? So because of that, they use a network to indicate that they are not hearing me. Is that how it is? Okay. They don't know, and because they don't know, the network will not be working.
But please, you mentioned. Doc, did you mention my name?
Oh, of course, if you are here, I did. Unless you are not following us.
Oh, okay, sorry. A call came through right now when you were talking with Miriam. So, yes, I can respond to that. If the allocated efficiency is 0.8, that means that the firm will have to cut its cost of purchasing inputs, would have to cut that cost by 20% to achieve the level of efficiency of its PN.
Okay. Emily, what would you have to say?
Okay, so for allocative efficiency, I would say that for 80% allocative efficiency, it means that the input mix can be further changed by 20% so that the firm can be more efficient. As in, if they are using, can I make an example?
Always.
Okay, so maybe if we are taking teachers, for example, and then there are 5 teachers teaching only English, it can be that other subjects can be added to them so that there can be a 20% decrease somewhere. So that whilst the firm is maintaining its current efficiency, there can be that reduction for 20%.
Okay. So where is a change in mix here? Where is a change in the input mix here?
Okay, so the change will be that since other subjects are going to be added to them, where the other teachers who were previously teaching those subjects can be let go. That's one example, or they can be assigned other tasks.
Okay.
So it deals with having the correct proportion. He said, hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so it deals with reducing the resources in correct proportions. I think that's the proper term to use. Like changing it in correct proportions so that the firm can be more efficient.
Okay. So when you look at cost efficiency is the product of technical and allocative efficiency. What is that allocative efficiency? Sorry, what is that technical efficiency? The technical efficiency is the ability of the firm to cut down the input given the output. So if the inputs were 10 and the inputs are cut down to 4 and still producing that same output, that firm is technically efficient. So what makes technical efficient different from the cost efficient is the allocative efficiency. This point is very important, even though you know it. So the allocative efficiency is actually the technical efficiency multiplied by, sorry, the scale, the cost efficiency is the technical times the allocative. So what makes cost efficiency different from technical efficiency is allocative part. So what is allocative part? The allocative part is you have input of 10 and you are producing an output of 200. And you cut down the input to 4, you are still producing an output of 200. You are allocatively, sorry, you are technically efficient. Okay. Now you look at the inputs that you cut there. And this is what happens. Now, the inputs that you have, which are 4, they were actually, the 10 was actually 5 of maybe labor, and then 5 of some capital. That was the 10. And then you brought it down to 2 of labor and then 2 of capital. That is what led to the 4. Okay. Now, after you brought it 2 of labor and 2 of capital, you realize that this labor, you don't want to still cut down the labor, but the labor you are going to use, you're going to employ a cheap labor. You are still going to have 2, okay? But then the price that you are going to pay for the first labor, okay? So labor 1 and labor 2, okay? You are paying a price of maybe 1,000 cedis for each one of them. But now, still with the same 2 labor, one of them, you decide that you will employ a cheaper labor. So you employ still 2. You haven't changed the number. You still have that 2. And now with these 2, you are paying 500 for the second labor because you've employed a cheaper labor. And still, you are able to produce your 200 that you are producing. So you are still maintaining that 200. So even after being technically efficient, you are still able to cut down the price you are supposed to pay to the labor. So you're not cutting down the labor itself, but you are able to cut down by mixing that particular input. Okay. So you're choosing a very inexpensive input so that in terms of cost, you pay a cheaper cost. So in this case, because you've done this, it will not reflect in this technical efficiency, but it will reflect in cost efficiency. And that point, I want you guys to understand why it is important, because later on we are going to split that cost efficiency later. Yes, Christopher.
Yes, please. I think I'm confused.
So you sound a bit far.
Hold
Uh-huh.
on. I think I'm confused on the difference between the technical efficiency and the
So you sound really, really far, and it looks like the network is a bit rough.
Hello, Doc.
It's better. I don't know what you did, but it's much, much better.
Hello, Doc.
Yes, it's better now. It's better. Hello? Yes, Christabel, did you use an earpiece?
Yes, please.
So now you're not using the earpiece, right?
Now I'm still using it.
Okay.
But even when
Yeah, you go ahead. You go ahead.
I'm finding it difficult to understand the difference between the technical efficiency and the allocative efficiency.
All right. She says she's struggling to understand the difference. So can somebody explain it again to her? Stephen, you have been using this thing for years.
Hello, Doc.
Yes.
Hello, Doc.
Go ahead.
Doc, from what you explained, it means that technical efficiency, you maintain the output. That is from the example you gave, the 200 unit output is maintained, but you are able to achieve that with less amount of input. That is, initially used to produce the output with 10 units of input, but now you are using 4 to produce the same output. It means you've achieved technical efficiency. But when it comes to allocative efficiency, you are trying to use a unique mix of the inputs to achieve the same output. So for example, this 4 units, if the 4 units were professors teaching what graduates to pass maybe or IELTS.
Yeah. You're making a very good point, but you're not
use. Sorry, the network is separate.
You're back. You're back. Continue.
So if you realize that you will be able to use, for example, ordinary university graduates whom you are going to pay 2,000 each to accomplish the same task, it means you will be able to use just 8,000 cedis to pay these people to achieve the same units. Then it means
instead of what? 8,000 instead of what? Give me instead of
8,000 cedis instead of 20,000. Because you are the 4 units. If they were university professors, you'll be paying them 5,000 each, and it would be 20,000. But if you realize that you can achieve the same unit, the same output unit, I mean, if we assume that quality will be the same, it means that you would have achieved allocative efficiency by being able to cut down the cost, the 20,000 cost to 8,000. That's my understanding for now.
Good. Christopher, do you understand that one?
Yes, sir.
Good. Yes. Now, Emily will give you another example. Yes, Emily.
Okay. Doc, mine was a question. I wanted to be certain that, so in that case, we are saying that as long as we reduce the input to get the same objective, we are dealing with technical. So if we are talking about reducing input, it's technical. But when we talk about changing the input in some way to minimize cost, then we are talking about allocating.
That's it. Okay. So first of all, another example is national service students. The national service students are employed a lot by a lot of companies. Why do you think that they will employ or they will ask for the national service students to come and work for them every year instead of employing permanent workers to do the same work? Why? Why do you think so, Christopher?
They're trying to cut down costs because government pays for the benefits.
Yeah. And you will agree that these national service people are able to do the same thing that the existing worker is able to do, isn't it?
Yes.
And so why would I not want to rather pay the national service that amount of 600? Okay, so if, let's say that I have workers and I have 50 workers and I need extra 50. If I should go for permanent staff for that 50 and I pay each person 1,000, what it means is every month I'm going to be paying 50,000. But then I realized that, hey, the national service students are there. For them, they know that they are just giving up themselves. So why not I employ this same 50 to be national service people? Instead of paying them 1,000, I'd rather pay them 500. And every month I'll be saving 25,000. I'm still able to achieve the same target of output that I was doing. And I'm still able to do that cheaply. And therefore I become cost efficient. In other words, my ability to think and be able to change that input, the same number, all right, but I change that input to a less expensive, input that makes me allocatively efficient, which when I add to my existing technical efficiency, I now become cost efficient. Does that make sense, Christopher?
Yes, because I think my understanding is that you try a way to blend your input.
I'm sorry, I'm not able to hear you at all. Just move yourself a little bit again.
Doc, can you hear me now?
Much better. Yes.
So I'm saying that I think you try your way to blend your inputs in such a way that you reduce the cost of the inputs.
That's it.
And achieving the same level of outputs.
That's it.
Okay.
That's it. And that is what we are talking about. That is allocative efficiency here. But of course, once you are trying to be allocative efficient, try and be technically efficient first. That's all we are also saying. So just try to cut the overall input down. And you can see that sometimes companies do that in the mining sector. They will cut down the employees. They'll cut down the employees. They'll reduce the number of employees. Then after that, they will look for the people they are paying too much. Then they will say that you guys, we are paying you too much. So you guys can go, because they think in their mind that whatever these guys are doing, the lower level staff will be able to do. And because they will be able to do, they will now want the higher level staff to go, some of them to go, and then they will replace them with this and pay them a lower amount. Unless it's a decision, management decision staff, which you can't easily replace. But you can replace middle level staff with lower level staff. Maybe you cannot replace high senior level. But yes, Francis.
Doc, my question is, so can we still say you are cost efficient if you are not able to cut down the inputs? Your inputs still remain the same, but you are able to cut down your cost or the price of what you are paying. Can we still say you are?
You don't cut down the price directly, but you cut the price down indirectly. That's what you mean, isn't it?
Yeah. So the cost. So maybe
you control the mix, which then controls the price. You can't be cost efficient, because for you to be cost efficient, you must be both technically and allocatively efficient. So in that case, you'll be inefficient. You'll be allocatively efficient, but technically inefficient, and therefore you'll be cost inefficient. Please, you get that?
Okay, yes.
Okay. The reason why I'm spending a bit of time here is I want you to understand the practicality of allocative efficiency. Okay. Once you get that, that is good. So going back to the explanation Francis gave, the point Michael, you gave, the 0.8 means that if you take that firm can reduce the current cost by 20%. How? He doesn't have control necessarily of the price per se, but can reduce the current cost of the industry, of the firm, by choosing, that's key, by choosing a more cost-efficient input mix. When we say a more cost-efficient input mix, we are talking about cheap, or by allocating the funds towards a less expensive, that is towards a cheap but sufficient input mix. That is what we mean by allocative efficiency. So your ability to cut down your current cost by 20%. Okay. So if you are 80%, what it means is that you still have the capacity to cut down your current cost by 20%. If you are 90% allocatively efficient, it means you still have the capacity to cut down your current cost by 10%. If you are 100% allocatively efficient, it means that you have 0%. Okay, you still have capacity to reduce your current cost by only 0%, which means that you don't have to reduce the current cost, which means that, you know, you are allocatively efficient in that regard. Okay. Any question on this?
I want to find out. So my question is on allocative efficiency. I would like to know from the examples that were given, am I right if I say that this allocative efficiency would work best with the factor of production called labor rather than the others, or it's applicable to all of them? Because it's very easy to change or blend labor. However, when it comes to some resources or some equipment and machinery, I think personally it would be a bit difficult or abstract when you say you want to blend the mix. So if you can throw more light on that. Thank you.
Well, don't say thank you. Give me examples of where it is difficult so that I can understand. Okay, so for the we use the NSS personnel as an example, that a company can decide to employ people, a number of people. But then when you look at the cost involved in employing those people, it's economical, they fall on national service personnel to do that same job or task at a moderately or at a subsidized or reduced cost. So I think when you look at the factors of production, if we take labor out, it's very easy to mix or blend when it comes to allocative efficiency. However, when we go to other resources or other things organizations work with, like maybe equipment or capital, yes, these things, I don't know how you'd be able to alter the mix of some other inputs.
Okay.
No, that's what you're saying, right?
Yes.
So let me give you another example. Okay. Let's give a practical example. During COVID-19, and now that COVID is even over, you fly from the United States or you fly from Ghana to Dubai to go and do a meeting. You fly again every week to go and do a meeting. But you have now found a cheaper way to do that. You can have your Zoom, sit in front of your computer, discuss the same thing as if the person is right here with you. And you are able to achieve the same level of output you would have achieved had you flown and spent a business class and paid that huge amount to Emirates. I think it's making sense.
Yes, sir.
So it's not labor per se, it is a kind of a technology that is being used to replace that capital approach. And you still become allocatively efficient because you're able to achieve the fund. So that's one example. Another example, either you know, some people sometimes want to travel by plane, or they want to fly from Accra to Kumasi. And when you take the plane, you're going to pay some 4,000 or something. But when you take this transport back. It's going to be cheaper. And you ask yourself, but even if I get there early, I don't even know what I'm going to do anyway. I still have to wait for the evening for the program. So why don't I use that 6 hours or that 5 hours to relax in a coach and just sleep over? And by the time I realize you get a point. Yes. So you're still able to pay 100 cedis instead of paying 2,000, and you are able to achieve the same objective. So there are several examples that will fit into this situation. There are several. Prince.
Doc, I wanted to say that even with production factor like materials, we have procurement departments whose job is to assess the market to always make sure that they are able to source less cheaper materials that can achieve the same quality. So, I mean, we will end up, they say, achieving allocative efficiency if we are able to get much cheaper input materials for production. The same with equipment also.
So both, you can have cheap labor, and you can also have cheap capital. And by the way, cheap here doesn't mean that therefore it's going to do a cheap job. This is when you realize that it's going to still do a good job, the same as this one. Yes, Francis.
Okay, Doc. So from what Christabel is saying, what I pick from it is definitely you can cut down on the cost of some inputs, but there may be an input, for example, capital, which is a fixed asset. When you buy them on the P&L statement, it is accounted for through depreciation. So if you use the straight line depreciation, the cost is fixed. Every year, that is the cost you would incur. So an example for that one, there is no way it's going to change. You can't cut it down. But for the other resources, inputs, you can cut them down. So does that still make the allocative? So the allocative efficiency, must every single input be cut? Or some can be cut, but some can stay.
Well, let's answer that, because I think you know the answer. Must every single input be cut?
And that's my question.
By the way, that statement by must every single input be cut, it's not all the time. In fact, it's not most of the time. And it's not all the inputs. But the point is that you can still handle some of the inputs. That's a key point being discussed here. You can still handle some, if not all of the inputs. Maybe you cannot even handle any, but it's not possible that you cannot handle any. There's always something to do. See, this is the point. There is always a better way. Just that you haven't figured out that yet, isn't it? For example, there was no COVID-19 vaccine in the year 2015, unless a conspiracy theorist can bring about something. There was no COVID-19 vaccine. But the moment COVID hit, we now have COVID-19 vaccine. But somebody could have sat down and said, there is not there. There is no capital to handle this situation. There is no resource to come out with it. But there is. As we sit here, there is a way that you can learn that you are not learning. Right now, we have artificial intelligence that is able to learn, write an exam and get a B. A computer can just write an exam, give the computer the exam question, and the computer will do that exam, just as you will do that exam, and get at least B. And this is at the infancy stage. They are building, they're training that computer to be able to think and now be able to learn and get an A, which students themselves struggle to get. There's always a better way. Okay. But if I haven't found that way, then it looks like it's not possible. It's not possible from the perspective that you are looking at. But everything is possible. Francis, do you get the point I'm trying to say?
Yeah, Doc, I get the point very
Yeah.
clearly.
When we go to the extreme situation, somebody might tell you that it's not easy to do PhD in my current situation. But that is because the person is looking at it from his angle. Now he finds another person who is having a worse situation than him and still doing the PhD, and another who has even finished. Then the person says, wow, it's always possible. All right. At least the most important thing is that we know what allocative efficiency implies. Okay. Now, let's go to the cost efficiency. If the cost efficiency is 0.8, what does that mean? What is the meaning of that? Okay, of course, it means that a firm is cost inefficient. And so 20% of the actual cost could be saved. So if the cost is 2 billion, 20% of that actual cost could be saved for the cost to come down. But that firm's inefficiency in terms of cost is not making it cut down the cost. So the person has got more capacity to improve the cost. Smaller score implies larger inefficiency and savings potential. Okay, so you've got a lot of savings. If your score is small, like 0.1, then it means your inefficiency is big, 90%. And so your savings potential is very, very, very high. That's what it means. So understand. So if you look at the implication of the cost efficiency and the allocative efficiency, there is something in there that you can fish out. There is some difference. Okay. If I should ask you now, what's the main difference then between the allocative efficiency and then the cost efficiency? Well, you can see that it's allocative really that is driving the cost efficiency. But then the allocative, the capacity to achieve allocative efficiency has to do with something you do with the input. But your capacity to handle cost efficiency is something you do with the cost itself. Okay, so it all comes back to the cost, but the cost efficiency is a direct way of handling cost. The allocative efficiency is an indirect way of handling the cost. I hope you get what I mean here. Okay. If you don't get, you can let me. All right. So now let's go into a bit of derivation, mathematics. So a cost efficient firm, you can get a firm that is cost efficient using a VRS or a CRS. Okay. So you can estimate your cost efficiency under variable retention scale. You can estimate your cost efficiency under constant retention scale. And whatever score it is, if it is 1, it means that firm is cost efficient. And for that to happen, the firm will have to choose the right input mix and use those inputs in a technically efficient manner. The right input mix is allocative efficiency. Using it in the technically efficient manner is technical efficiency. So there's a language we tend to say in DEA parlance that use the right resources and use those resources in the right way. Which one is technical efficiency here? Use the right resources and use those resources in the right way. Which one is technical efficiency? Which one is allocative efficiency? You tell me that. Yes, Prince.
Right resources is technical efficiency, and then right way is allocative efficiency.
That's it. So guys, keep that in mind. Using the right resources is technical. Using those resources in the right way is allocative efficiency. And all the references therein are able to explain all of that. Okay. Enough. Now let's go to how to estimate cost efficiency. And now we are talking about a formalization, a mathematical formalization. So note that the efficiency can be in terms of distance function. So you can talk about cost distance function, or you can talk about cost efficiency. Please note that cost efficiency is the reciprocal of the cost distance function. So take note of this. The cost efficiency is a reciprocal of cost distance function, which means that the cost distance function is a reciprocal of the cost efficiency. I'm just writing it in another way. Okay. So an input distance function, okay, an input-oriented distance function will be a technical, input-oriented technical efficiency. Okay. It's reciprocal. So let's assume that we have a data set, and this data set is an unbalanced data set. So that means that you have, let's say, input, and then you have output, and then you have the DMU. And you have A, you have B, you have C, okay, for the first data set. And then you can also have another data set where you have DMU, and the DMUs are A, B, C, and D. So that means that these are unbalanced samples. So with that in mind, now, so we have a panel of J, 1 to N firms, okay, each time period. So the time periods are T1 to T, capital T. Each of these firms is consuming an X input, okay, and this X input is a positive real octant. The inputs are I, okay, all the way to M, and they produce the output Y, okay, which is R all the way to S. We can define a production possibility set or a production technology set as follows. So the production set is given by this technology. To the power T is simply indicating time T. So I want to ignore that for now. Okay. To the power T, I can ignore all the to the power T. So the technology set is made up of the input-output correspondence. Okay. So this is the input-output correspondence, which is a member of the real positive octant of input and output, where the inputs can produce the outputs. So this is a technology set. You can draw this, but this is a mathematical way of writing the technology set. Okay. Now, given this technology set, we should assume that the technology set is non-empty, okay, which means there's something inside it. It is closed, okay, which means it's not unbounded. It is convex, which means that there's a linear combination of 2 points, if they are feasible, will lead to a feasible, set within between the points. Okay, and then of course it's bounded. Okay. And then we can also assume that there are some prices W, which are a member of the real positive octant, the input prices, okay, which also number the same as the number of the input. Okay. Given this production technology, we can define a cost function as this. You can always ignore that superscript now. The cost function that you are seeing here, you can see that there is no input in the bracket because the output, let me use a different thing here. The output and the prices are given. So we are assuming a kind of a relatively perfectly competitive market. So the cost function is given by Wx. The W is the input price, the X is the input itself. Okay. And your goal is to produce that, minimize that Wx, assuming that the inputs are positive. So in short, you must always write the production function. Okay. You must always know the production function, and then you must know the cost function. You must write these two whenever you are formalizing it in your thesis or in your journal paper. Okay, you got to write the production function we wrote before, and then write this one, which is a cost function. Okay. Now, we've already explained these terms. Okay, so the interpretation is that this value here is the minimum cost. Okay. The minimum cost of producing a particular output. Okay. And this output is made up of multiple outputs as a vector. Given the inputs, remember the output is also given, and then the technology is also given. And now we can get the input vector. Okay, so you have a question? Michael, you first.
Yes, so Doc, you mentioned that even it's written clearly in our first equation that the cost function, we have given the output and the input prices. But how then do we reduce, with cost efficiency, we are looking at reducing our cost. And if we are to reduce our cost from previous discussions, we need to be looking at reducing input prices. How do we reduce that? Excuse me?
You don't reduce the input prices, you reduce the inputs.
Okay. All right.
Watch this one. The prices are given. The prices are in the input prices are given. So they are fixed.
Okay.
By the more or less by the invisible hand of Adam Smith. For example, if you look at the price of tomatoes in Kumasi, the price of tomatoes in Accra, if you ask the prices, they are similar. They are more or less fixed. If the price of basket is 200, this woman will say 200, this person will say 200, this person will say 200. As if somebody told them, but the invisible hand has fixed the price. But the inputs, you can reduce the inputs. Does that already answer your question? You can still go ahead. Michael, are you there? Okay, I saw another hand.
No. Yeah, I'm there.
Are you done?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay. So that is it. So these prices are given. So I want you to know the cost function and the production function, which I showed earlier. This is a cost function. Now, remember that the cost function is a function. So it's more or less like it's also a cost technology. And the cost technology will have a boundary. The boundary of the cost technology, remember the technology is always made up of the boundary. The technology is always made up of the boundary plus the space. That's the technology. So the boundary of this cost technology, the boundary of the cost technology is what we call the isocost. That is the boundary. And the cost boundary is given by this formula here. It's the isocost. When we come to the graph, you'll appreciate it. But this is the mathematical. So what this means is that the cost function that you guys are seeing up here, the cost function that you are seeing up here, this cost function up here is made up of this cost boundary, okay? It's made up of this cost boundary plus a space. It's made up of the cost boundary plus a space. That is why you are able to see that this WX is the same WX, but this time it is the cost boundary. It's a boundary or the minimum cost, because the minimum cost is at the boundary. So note the production function, note the cost function, of which its boundary is the isocost. Note these three formulae. Okay. Then what next? Let me just move on. Then on the basis of that, we can now formulate our linear programming of this whole analysis. Now, how do you do that? I'm going to show you, but I'm going to take you back to normal DEA. Okay. In the normal DEA language, okay, long before all of this cost, Chance, Cooper, and Rhodes, they defined an input-oriented model and an output-oriented model in a fractional form. Fractional makes it nonlinear. And they define an input-oriented function as maximizing. We know this already, we've learned this already. Where you are maximizing. Our input-oriented, not output-oriented, input-oriented. You are maximizing a weighted output over the weighted input, subject to the same weighted output over weighted input, but less or equal to 1. We've learned this long ago. The output oriented of that input oriented is the one on the right here. What's the difference between the output oriented and the input oriented? Oh, by the way, who can tell me one difference between the output oriented and the input oriented? Just look at it here. Who can tell me one difference? In fact, there are about 4 differences between the output oriented on this right here and then the input oriented on the left here. What is one difference you can detect? I just want you to know this thing so that when you are writing, ever formulating your model, you should get a feel of these things. What is the main difference between the input oriented and the output oriented? You can give me one difference. There are about 6 differences I spot here. Theophilus, are you here? Miriam, give me one difference between the output and the input.
Okay. With the input, it's less or equal to 1, but with the output is.
You say it is. What is? What is less or equal to 1?
With the input, the efficiency is less or equal to 1.
Mm-hmm.
But with greater than or equal to 1.
All right, okay. Who has spotted another difference? By the way, you should know that all of these things are efficiency scores. So what you see here is an efficiency score. So note these 5 differences. 1, with the input oriented, you are maximizing. With the output oriented, you are minimizing the ratio. That's the first one. Second, with the input oriented, you are maximizing the weighted output over the weighted input. Output over input, weighted output over input. But with the output oriented, it is the weighted input over output. That's the second difference. The third difference is that that same ratio is less than 1 in the input oriented, is greater than 1 in the output oriented. Okay. And then I think basically that's it. These are the 3 main differences. And the ratio is an efficiency score. So keep that in mind. Now I'm going to focus on one of the orientation. This is what you guys have learned. So this orientation, you can now linearize it. So I've just taken the output oriented and I've linearized it. Remember, it was minimized. We still maintain the minimized. Okay. So you maintain the minimized, you linearize it by removing the fraction. That's all it means. And how you do that, we've done it before. You cross multiply and then you rearrange. And when you do that, you get this. I have added the variable returns to scale here. So the variable returns to scale is the sum of the weight equals to 1. Now, this whole thing is called a multiplier model. This whole thing here is called a multiplier model. Every linear programming has a primal and a dual. Okay. The primal is the envelopment model, and the dual is a multiplier model. So this is more or less the dual of a linear program, if you have learned the linear program. Now, so this multiplier model can now be converted into a primal because it's a dual. How do you convert it to the primal? When you convert it to the primal in the DEA language, it's called envelopment model. So, and it's very nice when you're writing your methodology section and you're able to just indicate some of these things. Okay, so how do you do that? How do you convert it to the envelopment model? Simple. Okay. If you understand, and we've done this before, You just convert it by indicating that the input-oriented score, let me just note it. Okay. The input-oriented score here is achieved. The fact that it's a star means that it has been achieved. The numerical value has been found. And you can find that value by minimizing that theta with the intention of finding the lambda and then the theta. The theta is objective function, but it's also a decision variable. And then subject to the constraint that the weighted sum of the inputs of all the other DMUs, not the DMU you are assessing, all the other DMUs is less or equal to the input of the DMU under consideration. But because you are doing input orientation, oh wow. So this thing is not output orientation, please note. I think I've made a heading mistake. This is an input orientation, but in the heading I've written output. So take note, it's not output. So this heading here is supposed to be input orientation. Now, but it's quite interesting. I wrote output orientation. I said this below is input orientation. Okay, so it is input orientation. That is why you see the theta is multiplying the input. And then of course the output constraint is here. This last constraint is a VRS constraint. And of course the one here is a non-negativity constraint. You should know all of these constraints. So this one is input constraints. This is output constraints. Okay. This is a convexity constraint. And then the last one here is a non-negativity constraint. So you should know these constraints. So this is an input-oriented DMO. This one has no cost. Nothing of cost. Everything is input and output. Input and output. Okay. Now, in an output orientation, I've just changed it. In an output orientation, we are not using theta, we use phi. And this again, you know it and you remember. So please, guys, if you are in your work, like a Christabel, if you are doing output orientation, you are going to use the output orientation approach throughout. Your formulation and everything is going to be in output orientation. If you are using input orientation, you're going to use input orientation throughout. If you are using non-orientation, you're going to use non-orientation. So note it. Now, again, this is an output orientation. And because it's an output orientation, okay, the phi is multiplying the output. Okay. So again, this is your input constraint. This is your output constraint. This is your convexity constraint. And this last one is your non-negativity constraint. For you to know what orientation you're dealing with, the one multiplying the input or the output will tell you. If it's multiplying the output, okay, if the theta or the phi is multiplying the output, it's an output orientation. And in an output orientation, in the envelopment model, you maximize. Okay, so this, I expect you to let it be on your fingertips, okay, so that you are able to explain it easily. Because sometimes when you put your model down, your supervisor is going to ask you, so can you walk me through the elements of the model? This is an input. This is a lambda. What does the lambda mean? The lambda is the weight, the importance assigned to each input in determining the efficiency of the targeted DMU. The targeted DMU has got a subscript of 0, not, but other DMUs have got a subscript of J. Remember, J is equal to 1 all the way to N. And one of them you are going to analyze. So one of them is the knot. And the knot is on the right-hand side of this. The left-hand side here is a technology. The right-hand side is something that is inside that technology. So it's a point, and that point is made up of an input and output correspondence. That is creating that. Okay, so we've learned these things. This was just a quick recap. Now, let's go to cost efficiency. How do you formulate it? I'm interested in this very much because this is exactly what you would do when you are formulating yours. But you don't just formulate, you understand. First thing, note that the items in the bracket are Y and W because those things, Francis, going back by your point, they are given. The Y is given, the W is given. Your goal is to minimize the total cost. How do you define total cost? Total cost really is more or less like the price times the input. As many input as there are. The price times the input. So what you are seeing here is that because there are many, the total cost is going to be the price of input 1 multiplied by the input 1, the price of input 2 multiplied by input 2, the price of input 3 multiplied by input 3, all the way to the price of input n multiplied by input n. So that is what is that's what, so with this, I can now say that total cost or cost is equal to the weighted sum of the input price, okay, multiplied by the input. Multiplied by the input. So that's what you see at the top here. So that top is the objective. Okay. Remember, you are minimizing the cost. Keep that in mind. You are minimizing the cost. But notice, you can't minimize that cost unless you minimize the input. So the input will have to be minimized. And you're going to see this one graphically. You got to minimize the input to hit your isoquant. Then you go further to minimize the cost to hit your isocost. The microeconomic definition of isoquant is this. And then the isocost is there are many of the isocosts, and one of them is tangent to the minimum. Okay. So at the tangency, cost is minimized. At the tangency of the isocost and the isoquant, okay, is minimized. Now, if you are here, if your firm is there, and you're trying to minimize something of the firm can go along this one. This is a radial measure, so you have to go towards the origin here. As you are going, you will hit the isoquant first before you hit the isocost. So that means that you minimize the input first, and then you go and minimize the cost. Any point on the isoquant is a technically efficient point. Any point on the isocost is a cost-efficient point. So keep that in mind. We use the isocost to measure cost efficiency graphically. We use the isoquant to measure technical efficiency. So with that in mind, so we are minimizing this total cost, which is made up of the input as well. Then how do you now go further? Subject to what? Well, subject to the same constraint, input constraint, and then output constraint. Please watch it. Subject to input constraint and output constraint. Note that there is no theta on the right-hand side. There's no theta there. There's no theta or phi multiplying any of them. Why? Because we are not minimizing just the input or maximizing output. We are minimizing cost. And even though cost minimization will require that we minimize the input, that input has been captured here already. So we don't go and bring a theta or anything to come and add it here again. Yes, Michael.
Apart from noticing that there's no theta attached to it, I also see that the x, that's the first circle x after a suffix p, does not have a subscript of I. No.
It doesn't have the zero, the not.
Is that a typo, or we are supposed to note that?
No, it is not a typo. Okay, and the reason is because that targeted is already captured also here with the input price, which is already multiplying the input. It's already captured there. Now the question now becomes, why is it that we are doing it for the output? We have it targeted for the output. Okay, remember, the targeted is used for those that are given. The input, the output is given, and the input price is also given. And so those are the ones that will have the not attached to it because they are given. So they can have they are given, they are not the ones you are going to minimize anyway, because they are given. You are not minimizing or maximizing them. But what you are going to minimize is the input itself. So that one has no knot, because whatever you are doing to that input, it will affect its given value of W or Y. It will affect it. Okay. So the Y here is given, and because it's given, you have that knot attached to it. But that is for the right-hand side, because remember, the left-hand side is the technology. The left-hand side is this one, the technology. You know, when you draw the X and Y, the technology part, this part, that's the left-hand side of this equation. That's the technology. So just note some of these few things whenever you are formulating the model, because you will have to formulate this model. You have to formulate a technically efficient model using a hypothetical example. You got to do the same thing using for the cost efficiency, using hypothetical. You got to formulate it. Steven, have you done your formulation? Did you understand that formulation you did using a hypothetical firm? You will do it. You will do it. Okay, so you got to understand the few elements that are hidden in there. All right. Now, the next thing after you've had your input constraint and your output constraint, the next is your convexity constraint. So if you are assuming variable returns to scale, you add this convexity constraint. And then don't forget your non-negativity constraint, which is lambda j greater or equal to 0. This is the complete formulation of cost efficiency model. Writing the model is one thing, explaining the model is another. Okay. All right, so how do you do it? This is how we go about estimating the cost efficiency model, the score. You solve the cost minimizing model, and that is the one up there. Okay, the cost minimizing model is that whole minimize blah, 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 blah. You solve that cost minimizing model, given the input levels, okay, that will give you the minimum cost. The minimum cost is different from the observed cost. Now, if the C naught is observed cost, the observed cost of the current input of the DMU, okay, is different from the minimum cost. So every DMU has its observed cost. We are going to calculate that very soon. Every DMU has got its observed cost. And from that DMU, you must find the minimum cost for that particular DMU. So another DMU can have a different minimum cost from another DMU. And once you've got observed cost and the minimum cost, then you can easily estimate efficiency. There are two ways of estimating efficiency. One is using the minimum cost, note that here, the minimum cost divided by the observed cost. But another is using distance. We'll come and use the distance. Okay? It's a distance to the isocost over the distance to the isoquant. In fact, it's supposed to be distance to the DME. It's not isoquant, it's DME. Okay? It's distance to the firm, the DME. The distance to the isocost over the distance to the isoquant rather gives you the allocative efficiency. Okay? And mathematically, this is how you work it. It's a minimum cost over the observed cost, which is the same as this. So the star is the minimum. And then the one with not the star is the observed. Cost efficiency is minimum cost over the observed cost. That's it. If you don't get it, you can explain. So now, how do you find this? The terms I've written, I'm just explaining. The CYW is a minimum cost of producing a given output, okay, given the input prices. It's a minimum cost. So remember, output is given, input prices are given, the technology is given. Okay. And the WI naught is the price of the input I for the targeted DME. And then the X and the Y's are the input and output for any of the other DMEs. we've already established that cost efficiency is also called overall efficiency. So the OE, which is overall efficiency, is cost efficiency, which can be split into technical and allocative under the CRS, or can be split into pure technical, scale efficiency, and allocative under the VRS. So this is how you get a cost efficiency. The ability to produce a current output at the minimum cost. That's cost efficiency. Now, it's easy to find allocative efficiency once you have the technical and then you have the cost efficiency. Take note. Allocative efficiency is simple. Allocative efficiency is simply the cost efficiency divided by the technical efficiency. And you're able to get that from here. Okay. So if you want allocative, you divide both sides by technical, and that is how you get allocative efficiency. So you don't calculate allocative efficiency. You don't formulate, you don't formulate a linear programming for allocative efficiency. You formulate a linear program for cost efficiency and for technical, and then you take the ratios to get your allocative. So take note of that. All right. Now, allocative efficiency, we've explained it multiple times. We've explained it tediously. We've given examples. I'm not going to go so much into this. It's enough for you to understand that it captures the degree to which a firm that is already technically efficient want to further reduce the cost, but you can't reduce the cost directly, but has to do it indirectly by selecting an optimal mix of the inputs. Okay. Given that the price is given, okay, at which they can secure the input. So you change the input mix, and that is allocative efficiency. All right. So when you're using distance function, I told you the distance function deals with D, and then the efficiency deals with TE, or technical efficiency. So anytime you see D, if you incorporate time element into the work, the same thing will apply. The same thing, just as I indicated. Okay? You will still have allocative efficiency being equal to cost efficiency over technical, but just that you have time T to indicate that we are in year 1, or time T plus 1 to indicate that we are in year 2. This is possible because of duality. You can convert the input, the technical efficiency to technical distance function, and the cost efficiency to cost distance function using the principle of duality. Okay. And that's what I meant by the reciprocal. So when you use a reciprocal, you can always get 2. Sometimes it's good to stick to 1 and go with that. All right. So you're calculating all of these yourself, but this interpretation must come before your final calculation is achieved. Okay. So you're not just calculating, but you have to interpret this. You have to give the reader an understanding. Okay, so let's start. This is a hypothetical DME. Do you all have this DME? Do you all have this data? This data set? You do, okay. I would suggest that if you have the data set, you've got to open your Excel with it and open your RStudio with it, because very soon we're going to start some interesting calculations. Okay, so follow me here, and if you don't understand, let me know. Okay, please, it's important you follow this, because this is probably the first and last time you will get a simple explanation that will help you to. In your own thesis or paper, you have to generate your own hypothetical data set, like this here. You come out with this. You come out with this by yourself. But how can you come out with this by yourself? You just have to try one and plot it to see how it looks like. And if it's not looking good, you edit it, the numbers, so they can plot it. So on this data set, I have DMUs that are 5 DMUs. Okay. Yeah, A all the way to E. Each of these 5 DMUs have got 2 inputs, and these inputs have got their prices, and then 1 normalized output. The prices in this very example shouldn't be so, But in this very example, the prices are all the same. The input price 1 is 333. The output price 2 is 333. So the prices are the same in this context. We want to scatter plot the data. And by that, I mean, we want to plot the inputs and the output. The output is normalized, so we just plot it in X1 and X2 graph, X1 and X2 graph. And then the inputs, the DME will be inside it. And that is because we have normalized the output to 1. Just for simplicity, so that we can draw it in a 2-dimensional graph. Now, when you scatter plot it, this is what you get. So DME1, for example, is A is 3 and 5, and B is 3 and 3. So when you go here, A is 3 and 5. This is 3. A is 3 and 5. So that's 3 and then 5. They will meet here. So that is A. Okay. B is 3 and 3. So that is 3 and 3. They'll meet here. So that's B. Okay. And then the rest will follow. So when you scatter plot all of this, you're going to get this beautiful graph here. So that's what you're going to get. This beautiful, beautiful graph. So you see the A, you see the B, you see the C, you see the D, and you see the E, all in year 0. Or we can say year 1, whichever one you want. Now, and this you should do it in Excel. You should do it in Excel. Excel will automatically do all of this for you. The next thing to do is, after you scatter plotted it, you need to create the efficiency boundary, the production boundary. Remember, there's no cost yet, the production boundary. And in an input orientation, all you have to do is to use the principle of free disposability, use the principle of monotonicity, and convexity. So we've done this before. You're using these two, monotonicity and convexity, to join each point. So by joining these 2 points together, I'm assuming convexity and monotonicity. I'm assuming convexity and monotonicity. I'm assuming convexity and monotonicity. You're taking the extremes and then you join it so that they envelope the rest. Hence the name envelopment model. All right. So when you do that nicely, you're going to get this information, joining, joining, and joining. And now we can now measure the efficiency of each firm using the radial measure. The radial measure simply means trace everybody from where the DMU is to the origin, So we can create the radial for A like this. The radial measure distance, the proportional distance. Can do the same thing for B, can do the same thing for C and E. C and E will pass through the same line, the same radial line. And then for D, can do the same thing there. So we've been able to draw the radial measure. And then you remember the definition of efficiency. What is the definition? The definition of efficiency is, if it is, you are using technical efficiency instead of, I hope you can see the screen because I mistakenly paused it. Can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So the technical efficiency is the distance to the frontier divided by distance to the firm. That is the technical efficiency. So if I want to measure the technical efficiency of E, it is the distance to the frontier here, and the value is 5. Okay. So you write 5. I want to measure the technical efficiency of E. Okay. So it's distance to the frontier, which is 5, divided by distance to the firm E, which is 7.5. When you trace it down, you get 7.5. So it's 7.5. Now, note that it's the same as if we were to measure it on the y-axis. Okay, distance to the frontier will give you a value of 2, divided by distance to the firm, which will give you a value of 3. So it's the same as 2 over 3. And when you do that, That is going to give you 0.6667. So the technical efficiency score, and this is input. The input-oriented technical efficiency score for DMUE is 66.7%, which means that DMUE is inefficient, which makes sense because it's inside the frontier. It's not on the frontier. If you want the distance function score, you take the reciprocal of 0.667, and that will give you 1.5. So that is how you calculate technical efficiencies. Now, why am I able to calculate technical efficiency? Why? I am able to calculate this technical efficiency because I am using the isoquant. I'm using the observed isoquant. That is why. But if I want to calculate cost efficiency, I will need to have the observed isocost. Okay. So how do you do cost efficiency? Now follow me. This is the same data. There are two ways of finding the cost efficiency. I told you one way is using the principle of minimum cost. Okay, so cost efficiency is the minimum cost, CM, over the observed cost, CO. And that's what we are going to use first. The minimum cost over the observed cost. And let's find the observed cost. How do you find observed cost? Simple. The observed cost is given by, and observed cost means observed total cost, is given by the W1 multiplying the X1 plus the W2 multiplying the X2. Now, because these are two inputs, that's why I'm stuck at that. If there were three inputs, I would have done W3 multiplied by X3. So who can find me for A, the value of this for A? W1, so pick W1, multiply it by X1, and pick W2, multiply by X2. Who can tell me for A, and who can tell me for B? Emily, are you calculating? Press tab down, are you calculating?
Yes, please.
Please get me the A and then the B.
Okay, so for A, we have 9. And then
9, show me.
9 plus 15 for A.
Okay. So what you mean is that?
So it will be 24.
Good. So she has what you have here, 9 plus 15, that is 24. What about B?
And then B is also 9 plus 9, which is 18.
Okay, what about C?
C is 15 plus 6.
Which is?
21.
21. Okay. What about D? How the rest of you are calculating? You got to calculate all of this to be sure. In fact, if you are writing a thesis, you are supposed to do all of it. What about C? What about D? And what about the last one, E? Stephen Quash. What about E?
E will be 31.5.
All right. So that's it. E will be 31.5. You see, I could have shown you all of these answers. It's a different thing when I let you show me, because it means that you're following. So you see, ideally, what you could have done is that after you have your data, you create another column and then you find all the observed costs. Remember, all of these are called observed costs. Okay. Observed costs. So what we just calculated, they are all called observed costs. So now that we've got observed costs, we will need the minimum cost for each one. Okay. How do you get the minimum cost? And this is where it's interesting. Let me give you the idea. to get the minimum cost for A, let's say for A. So I'm going to calculate the minimum total cost. That's what I mean. Okay. Total cost minimum for A. What I have to do is I have to take the observed cost for A. The observed cost for A was 24, isn't it? Then I equate it with the W1, X1, W2, X2. But I should not write the X1 and the X2. I should write the letter X1 and X2 instead of writing the numbers. But as for the W's, I need to write them. So the W1 is 3, if you can remember. The X1, I'll have to write the X1. The W2 was also 3. The X was X2. So you should write it like this by fitting in the observed. Then what do? You assume, you create a straight line from this equation. This is an equation of a line. Create a straight line. How do you create a straight line? Assume that if this value 3x2, if x2 is 0, so you write if x2 is 0, what would be x1? You can tell me. X1 would be what? If x2 is 0, what is x1?
8.
8. And then if x1 is 0, what will be x2?
8.
8.
So you are going to have 8 for both x1 and x2. Then what do? You go to the graph and then draw these 2 points. You go to the graph and then look for 8. Okay. So in other words, if x1 is 0, okay, x2 is 8. Plot that coordinate. If x1 is 8, x2 is 0. Plot that second coordinate. And you see that they will be at the y and x axis. They'll be at the y and the x axis, and then you join them, and that gives you the isocost for A. Now, pay attention here, because this is interesting. Once you have this thing drawn, okay, let me just show you what I'm doing. So all that I showed is here, the 8 and 8. Once you draw the isocost, that isocost might not be tangent. Okay, but let me show you the one I drew. Okay, so the one I drew, the 8 will be above. It will be above this line here. If I want to look at the axis, 8 is somewhere at the top here. Okay. 8 is somewhere at the top here, and the other 8 is here. So technically, when you draw, the thing is going to be somewhere here. And your job now is to shift that line parallel downwards. You keep shifting it downwards, you keep shifting it downwards, you keep shifting it downwards until the last place it leaves the isoquant. Until the last place it leaves the isoquant. Guys, tell me, at which point is it going to leave the isoquant? At what point? Is it CO or BO? At what point will it leave the isoquant? I hope you guys can hear me.
Doc, is CO.
If you look at the parallel nature of the graph I've drawn, okay, at what point will this parallel line leave the isoquant?
Look at BO, point BO.
Yeah. If it was rather flatter, a bit flatter like this, flatter like that, then you would see that it is going to be at the point of C. But the way the graph is, it's not going to be at the point of CO, it's going to be at the point of B. Therefore, that point B is the minimum point for that DMU. And therefore, the cost there will be the minimum cost for that DMU A. You have to do this for each DMU. And you will come to note, of course, if it is a software, the software will do all of this just like that for you. And I want you to understand the principle. So if we are going to do for the next one, say E, what we have to do, I'll come and do E because you need to understand this. So you keep you draw one straight line and shift it parallel up or down. Normally it has to be up actually. And then shift it down. Then as you shift it down, the last section, parallel, the last section, it will leave the isoquant. That point is a minimum cost. So how do you find that point, that minimum cost? Well, that point is at B. In this case, it just happened to be at B. Okay, in this case, it just happened to be at this point. So when I clear all of these red things, you will see that this parallel line is at point B. So you just have to find the cost at that point. But the cost at that point, you know it already. How do we know? Well, because we have calculated the observed cost for each firm. And you happen to be that the observed cost at point B is 18. And that point is also the minimum cost for DMUA. So DMUA's minimum point is 18. What do you think DMUB's minimum point to be? Who can guess? DMUB, its minimum point. Remember, the minimum point is a tangency between an isocost and an isoquant. What do you think B's minimum point to be? The B's minimum cost point.
It's still 18.
It will also be at B. And in fact, if you go and calculate for the rest, you will see that all of them, when you trace the parallel line downwards, they will all be at the point B. None of them chose point C. Okay, let's take another example, just so you appreciate it. Because I remember, I always say that example is more efficacious than precept. So let's say I want to calculate the minimum point for E. What will I do? I will take the observed cost for E, which is 31.5, equal to, remember that is also going to be 3x1 because the W is 3. And then this is also going to be 3x2 because the W2 is also 3. And then I will assume if x2 is 0, what is x1? I'm trying to get the point and draw for E. So you take your calculator, okay, and if x2 is 0, then x1 will be 31.5 divided by 3. What do you get?
10.5.
Exactly. So you get 10.5 for x1. Okay, so that's x1. And then 10.52 for x2. It's just coincidental. They are going to be 10.5, 10.5. So all you have to do is to draw 10.5, 10.5. When you go to the graph, okay, let's go down to the graph. When you go to the graph, the 10.5 is going to be somewhere on the far end. So I just have to identify 10.5 at the top here, 10.5 somewhere here, and just what? Draw. Obviously, it's also going to be just like this parallel line. And because it's looking parallel like that, if I should trace it downward, the last place is also going to be is the point B. So it means that all of these firms are going to use that point number. The minimum cost, their minimum cost is going to be at the point B. And we know the value at point B to be 18. What if you didn't know the value? Well, you will have to just calculate. How do you find it? Well, if it was graphical, you just have to trace this value, that is 3. Trace this value, that is 3. Okay. And now that you know the value to be 3, you just find those values and go and multiply it by the W. So you know that it is 3 and it is 3. And you know that the W's are also 3 and then 3. So you just multiply it by that W there. In other words, you are using these input, okay, and that firm's this input and that firm's prices. Okay. So the prices of that firm, and in this case, all of the firms happen to have that price of 3. Okay, so that gives you 3 by 3, 3 by 3, and that's why you get 18. So all of them, unfortunately, are going to have 18 as their minimum point. But I want you to note that in reality, even in another hypothetical example, they should all not have the same minimum. And you will understand it when we come to productivity. Okay. Anyway, so once you calculate the minimum point, you have another column. Okay, so let me show you. So you see, I have this column here, which is the observed cost. And then you have another column you should create yourself and call it the minimum cost. Okay, sometimes I call it MC. In R, when we are estimating it in R, I will show you that you will see that you write S. And then the observed cost, I normally write OC. So OC becomes the observed cost, the MC becomes the minimum cost. At this stage, finding cost efficiency is simple. What is that? Cost efficiency is the observed cost over the minimum cost. So to get cost efficiency for each firm, you just have to find the observed cost over the minimum cost. 18 over 24, 18 over 18, 18 over 21, 18 over 30, 18 over 35, and that will give you the cost efficiency for each DM. That is how you find cost efficiency using the observed and minimum cost approach. Another way of finding cost efficiency, and all of these are hand computation, okay, hand computation. But this second other way is graph. But because graphs are not drawn to scale, you have to use the software to guide you. Okay. Now, so this is it. How do you find another way? Well, the another way that you find cost efficiency is this principle I gave you earlier. That cost efficiency, apart from it being the minimum cost over the observed cost, it can use the distance to the cost frontier. Okay. The cost frontier divided by the distance to the firm. The distance to the cost frontier. So if I want to find the cost efficiency for point A, all I need to do is to find the distance to the cost frontier here divided by the distance to the firm there. So the distance to the cost frontier is going to be 2.25, isn't it? And the distance to the firm A is going to be 3. Do you guys follow, by the way? The distance to the cost frontier is 2.25. The distance to the firm is 3. Do you guys follow?
Yes, please.
Now, divide the 2 and let's see the answer. 2.25 over 3. What do you get?
0.75.
So that is 0.75. Now let's check that against the first approach. How do we calculate the cost efficiency? The first approach, we said that the cost efficiency can be calculated using the minimum cost over the observed. And for A, it will be 18 over 24. What is 18 over 24?
No, 1.3. 1.3.
Check again.
It's the same, 0.75.
It's the same thing. So it gets 0.75, the same as the one we just found. So that is how you calculate the thing. So when you are displaying hypothetical graph, it's good to use both approaches to show that this is how you get it. But when you're doing normal work, you have to use the first approach because normal work requires that you don't use graph. But the second approach requires that you use graph. So that's it. But there's something about the graph you should note when you're using the graph. Okay. Even when you're using the graph, you should know that this value you had, the distance to this, the distance to the frontier, okay, the distance to the cost frontier, that gave you the 2.5. You will not get it by looking at it. You see the point? I got 2.25. Your eye cannot detect 2.25. Your eye is not able to detect 2.25. So how did I get a 2.25? Well, what I normally did is I calculated the cost efficiency with a software and I got 0.75. And I know that in order to get that 0.75, I need to get something, the distance from here to here, something. Okay, so let me call that thing G. So I need to get something, a point here, G, divided by the point A. But the point A, I know it already from the data set, so that is 3. So I now do G over 3. That's what I did. Now, if it is G over 3, then I can cross multiply and do 3 times 0.75. And 3 times 0.75 will give me 2.25. So that is how come I got to know that here is 2.25. So you still have to calculate the thing from the software and use that to explain the point. I hope you understand what I mean. And you all got to do this to be able to appreciate what is happening. Okay. So now take note of this summary here. The cost efficiency is the distance from the isocost to the DME. So the distance from the isocost here to the DME is a cost efficiency. So if I want to calculate my cost efficiency, the distance to the isocost divided by distance to the DME. That's what it's saying. But the exact gap between the isocost and the DMU, the exact gap there is the allocative efficiency. So the allocative efficiency is the gap between the isoquant and the isocost. So if I want to find the allocative efficiency, I just need to use the gap. But of course, remember that you can find allocative efficiency, which is the cost efficiency over the technical. That's an easy way. But I want you to know graphically how is that. So for a particular DMU like DME, if you want to find the allocative efficiency, it is a OF, okay, DME. E is this. Is a OF, that's the distance to the isocost. Okay. And then OCO divided by the distance to the isoquant. So the distance to the isoquant is 4.28. The distance to the isoquant is 5. So the allocative efficiency will be 4.28 over 5. You should learn how to calculate some of these things. Okay, maybe I need to give you an exercise to do, because in the process, you'll be able to appreciate this one. So on the basis of that, we can calculate the cost efficiency for each firm and juxtapose that with the other approach. And on this, you can get all the cost efficiencies for every DMU. This is a hand computation. This is something you got to do to demonstrate to the reader that you know how to do this thing. You have your graph, you have your data, you have your calculation. And when you've gotten all this, create a beautiful data set for that. Of course, to get allocative efficiency, you just do cost over technical. And this is the final data set that will summarize the result. Remember, this data set that I got it from a bit of the graph knowledge, a bit of the data set information, a bit of the software information, and then you put all of this down. In fact, there's another column you should have. Okay, if you're going to put all into, the other column you should have is this one. You should have a column that is defining the 2.2 over 3 and then the 18 over 4. Okay. But you can do that one separately, or you can put it in another 2 different columns, and then you can get the score. The technical efficiency is simple. You can use a graph to do that. You can estimate that. So that is how you hand compute cost efficiency, from which you can get technical and allocative. That's it. Now we are ready to do R. Okay, we are ready to execute everything we've done in R. Okay. I'm going to give some few minutes and then we'll start.